Good Monday morning. You ready to get going again? Brand new week. We actually are going to continue, however, what we started last week, the names of God. Now, why are there so many different names of God? And these are in the Old Testament, by the way. Why so many? Here's why. Because God wanted to reflect his character in his names, or they're given to him to describe his attributes or his characteristics. And there's so many facets to our infinite, all-wise God. In his sovereignty, he allowed people to call him these various names. Now, last week, we talked about the very major, and I only say major, they're all true, they're all major in one sense, but the common ones that were used throughout the Old Testament were the ones that we talked about last week. Now, this week, we're going to talk about more names. In fact, I'm going to try to do 2 per day. But these names often were only used in 1 or 2 places. That does not make them any less true and accurate, because names reflect the person. And this person is our God. So the 2 names today are compound names: Jehovah, which you remember from last week, the I am. When Moses asks, "Who are you, God? What name do I give?" He says, "I am." And those letters, and I encourage you to listen to that whole show, in writing didn't have vowels. So Jehovah is an attempt to put vowels to those so that we can pronounce it. But we don't know if that's true. But many times, like this first one, Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh, a compound word that means the Lord will provide. And if you're going to take notes this week, Jireh, Jehovah Jireh. Where is that found? It's found in Genesis chapter 22. And that's where Abraham took his son Isaac up on the mountain because God had told him to sacrifice Isaac. What a step of faith it took for Abraham to do that. When you remember, Abraham and Sarah had waited their whole lives for a child. And God had finally given them, that child, by the name of Isaac. They're going up there, and Abraham in faith went ahead, built the fire, the wood altar that he was going to then slay Isaac and sacrifice him. So they follow all through that. And he even in Genesis 22, you can read the whole story, but it says in verse 10, then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son in obedience to God. In obedience to God. It says later that he thought, well, God could bring him back to life if I follow through with this, but that was not God's plan. Verse 11, an angel of the Lord called out to him right as he's about to plunge that dagger into Isaac. And he says, Abraham, Abraham. And he says, here I am, Lord. Do not lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not do anything to him. And now that I know that you fear God because you've not withheld from me your son, your only son. And Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram, and he sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. And here's where that name of God comes in. Verse 14. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. The Lord, Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh. Now, the reason I'm taking a week to go over these names, and if we can do 2 a day, then that would mean we'd get 10. It's because every one of these names is applicable to our lives. How great when you have a need that you pray even. You could pray to Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. The Lord who provides. There's so many times that we need that aspect of our God in our lives, don't we? Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. He did so for Abraham. He did so in a strong way for Isaac. And he can do the same thing for you. Miraculously provide. The next name, and the other one for today that I want us to look at, is also a compound word, a compound name, and it's called Jehovah Rapha. Jehovah Rapha. R-A-P-H-A. Jehovah Rapha. And we find this in the story. And by the way, that means literally the Lord who heals. And I wanted us to get to this one today because I know many of us have ailments. And at time, this is, this happened. The Israelites had come out of Egypt, they crossed the Red Sea, and then only 3 days into their wanderings in the wilderness, they had nothing to drink. And they already were grumbling, which was sin. A lack of faith on their parts that God had brought them to the wilderness just to die of thirst. And this is found in Exodus chapter 15. And you remember the waters, they call them marah, which meant bitter in Hebrew, because the waters were bitter and they could not drink them at all. And so Moses cried out in prayer to the Lord, and the Lord answered. And he says in Exodus 15 at verse 26, he said, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, and do what is right, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases that I brought on Egypt, for I am and in Hebrew, for I am Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals. So this is a case where actually the Lord himself tells that this is his name, one of his names, the Lord who heals. And we know both from the context as well as other passages about the Lord that he heals. In this place, he's talking about actual physical diseases. And of course, we saw that in the life of Jesus too, didn't we? I've seen healing numerous times. Jehovah Rapha in the lives of my friends, and miraculous healings. He doesn't always choose to do that in this life, but I know that my loved ones and friends, close friends, who have gone to heaven, experienced Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals, which he said directly to Moses and the Israelites there in Exodus 15, I am the Lord who heals you. Now, there's also the aspect of him healing and forgiving their sins, because it's both, even in that passage, isn't it? Because they were sinning by having a lack of faith that the Lord would provide. And so the Lord says, I am Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals, both physically and spiritually. This may be the name that you need to call on this day. And if it is, please do not hesitate to do that. We're going to come back tomorrow with 2 more that'll be a blessing in your life. See you tomorrow.
Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give